The private jet touched down in Manila on a humid Tuesday afternoon in August 2018, its sleek white exterior gleaming under the tropical sun. Among the exclusive passengers stepping onto the tarmac was a young man in his mid-20s, dressed in an expensive suit, his eyes scanning the crowded airport with a mixture of nervousness and determination. His name was David Al-Rahman, the son of a prominent Saudi Arabian businessman worth over $200 million. But he was not in the Philippines for a business deal or a luxury vacation. He was there to find the woman who had raised him, the woman he had not seen in 15 years, the woman whose face still appeared in his dreams and whose voice he could still hear singing him to sleep. Her name was Rosario Cruz, and she had been his nanny, his protector, his second mother. What David was about to do would not only reunite two people separated by time and circumstance, but it would also shine a light on the invisible sacrifices made by millions of Filipino caregivers around the world.
Rosario Cruz was 24 years old when she first arrived at the Al-Rahman family compound in Riyadh in 1993. She had grown up in a small fishing village in Batangas province, the eldest of 6 children in a family that struggled to put food on the table every day. Her father was a fisherman whose daily catch was never quite enough, and her mother took in laundry from wealthier neighbors to supplement their meager income. Rosario had dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams of standing in front of a classroom and helping children learn to read and write. But dreams required money, and money was something her family simply did not have. When she turned 18, a recruitment agency came to her village promising jobs in the Middle East for young women willing to work as domestic helpers. The salary was $300 a month, more money than Rosario had ever seen in her entire life. It was enough to send her siblings to school, to repair the leaking roof of their small house, to buy her father a better fishing boat. So she made the decision that countless Filipino women have made before and since. She said goodbye to her family, boarded a plane to a country she had only seen in pictures, and stepped into a life that would test every ounce of strength and resilience she possessed.
The Al-Rahman family was one of the wealthiest in Saudi Arabia. Ahmed Al-Rahman had made his fortune in construction and real estate, building shopping centers and luxury apartment complexes across the Gulf region. His wife, Layla, came from an old aristocratic family and was accustomed to a life of comfort and privilege. When Rosario arrived at their sprawling compound with its marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and servants' quarters that were larger than her entire house back in Batangas, she felt completely overwhelmed. She had been hired to care for their newborn son, David, and to help with household duties. The first few weeks were incredibly difficult. Rosario spoke very little Arabic, and the family spoke very little English. She was homesick, lonely, and terrified of making mistakes. But when she held baby David in her arms for the first time, something shifted inside her. This tiny, helpless infant depended on her completely. He did not care about language barriers or cultural differences. He just needed someone to love him, to feed him, to keep him safe. And Rosario poured all the love she had, all the maternal instinct that she would have given to her own children if circumstances had been different, into caring for this child. As David grew from a baby to a toddler to a young boy, Rosario was there for every milestone. She was the one who woke up with him in the middle of the night when he had nightmares. She was the one who taught him his first words in both Arabic and English, and who secretly taught him a few words in Tagalog as well. She was the one who kissed his scraped knees, who celebrated his small victories, who sat with him when he was sick with fever. Ahmed and Layla Al-Rahman were busy people, consumed by social obligations, business meetings, and the demands of their privileged lifestyle. They loved their son, but they were often absent, traveling frequently and leaving David in Rosario's capable hands for weeks or even months at a time. And so, inevitably, David began to see Rosario not just as his nanny, but as his primary caregiver, his constant companion, his source of comfort and security. When he was 4 years old, he started calling her Mama Rosie, a name that made Lila visibly uncomfortable, but which Ahmed tolerated because it seemed to make his son happy. Rosario's days followed a relentless routine. She woke up at 5 a.m. every morning to prepare David's breakfast and get him ready for school. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, and managing the household. In the afternoons, she picked David up from school, helped him with homework, took him to the park, and made sure he ate healthy meals. In the evenings, she gave him baths, read him stories, and sang him Filipino lullabies until he fell asleep. Only after David was safely tucked into bed would Rosario retreat to her small room in the servants' quarters, where she would call her family in the Philippines and send most of her salary home. Her siblings were thriving because of her sacrifice. Her brother Miguel had graduated from high school and was now studying engineering at university. Her sister Elena was in nursing school. The younger children had proper shoes and school supplies. Her parents had been able to afford medical treatment when her father injured his back. Everything good happening to her family was because Rosario had chosen to give up her own happiness, her own youth, her own chance at love and motherhood to care for someone else's child. But the emotional toll was devastating. Every night after those phone calls home, Rosario would cry into her pillow, mourning all the experiences she was missing. She was not there when her sister Elena graduated from nursing school. She was not there when her brother Miguel got his first job. She was not there for countless birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. She was spending the best years of her life in a foreign country, sleeping in a tiny room, working from dawn to late at night, all so that her family could have opportunities she would never have herself. Yet when she looked at David's face, when he ran to her with outstretched arms, when he whispered, "Mama Rosie, I love you," before falling asleep, she felt a complicated mixture of joy and sorrow. She loved this child as if he were her own, yet he could never truly be hers. He was the son of a wealthy family, destined for a life of privilege and opportunity, while she was just the nanny, the hired help who would eventually be forgotten once he no longer needed her. When David was 9 years old, everything changed. Laila al-Rahman had grown increasingly uncomfortable with how attached her son was to Rosario. She felt that David relied on the nanny too much, that he showed more affection to Rosario than to his own mother, that he spent more time speaking Tagalog than Arabic. During a particularly heated argument one evening, David had accidentally called Lila by her first name while calling Rosario Mama. It was an innocent mistake, the confusion of a child who saw two maternal figures in his life, but for Lila it was the final straw. She insisted to her husband that they needed to let Rosario go and hire a new nanny, someone who would maintain proper boundaries, someone who would not try to replace her as David's mother. Ahmed, caught between his wife's jealousy and his son's happiness, made the decision that he thought would please his wife while minimizing disruption to David's life. He told Rosario that her contract would not be renewed, but he offered her a generous severance package, 3 months' salary, and a plane ticket home to the Philippines. He thanked her for her years of service and told her that David would understand. But David did not understand. When Rosario tried to explain that she had to go back to the Philippines, that she could not stay with him anymore, the 9-year-old boy was inconsolable. He cried, he begged, he threw tantrums that were completely out of character. He asked his parents why they were sending Mama Rosie away, what he had done wrong, whether she did not love him anymore. For weeks he refused to speak to his mother, and he barely ate. The new nanny that was hired, a stern Ethiopian woman who was efficient but distant, could not comfort him. Finally, Ahmed and Lila had to sit David down and explain that Rosario had her own family to take care of, that she needed to go home, that this was just how things worked. They told him that he was a big boy now and did not need a nanny anymore. But David knew the truth. He knew that his mother had sent Mama Rosie away because she was jealous, and he never quite forgave her for it. On the day Rosario left, David gave her a small handmade bracelet he had crafted from colorful beads in art class. He made her promise that she would never forget him, that she would always remember that he loved her. Rosario, tears streaming down her face, promised. Then she got into the car that would take her to the airport, and David watched through the window until the vehicle disappeared from view. Rosario returned to the Philippines after 15 years abroad. Her siblings had all graduated, found good jobs, and started families of their own. The money she had sent home had transformed their lives completely. But Rosario herself was 39 years old, unmarried, childless, and emotionally exhausted. She had given the best years of her life to caring for other people's children, and now she had to figure out what came next. She found work at a daycare center in Manila, earning a fraction of what she had made in Saudi Arabia, but finally able to sleep in her own bed and eat familiar food. She tried to move on, to build a new life, to forget about the little boy who had called her Mama, but she could not forget. On difficult days, she would take out the small bracelet David had made for her, now worn and faded, and she would remember his face, his voice, his laughter. She wondered what had become of him, whether he was happy, whether he ever thought of her. She had no way to contact the Al-Rahman family, no phone number or email address. It was as if that entire chapter of her life had been sealed shut, with no way to reopen it. David, meanwhile, grew into a teenager and then a young man, but he never forgot Rosario. As he got older and understood more about the world, he began to comprehend the magnitude of her sacrifice. He learned about the millions of Filipino overseas workers who left their families to work in the Middle East, about the difficult conditions many of them faced, about the emotional cost of caring for other people's children while being separated from their own. He realized that Rosario had given up her entire youth, her chance at having her own family, to care for him. And he realized that his mother had sent her away not because Rosario had done anything wrong, but simply because she was loved too much. This knowledge filled him with a complicated mixture of gratitude, guilt, and determination. When he turned 25 and graduated from university with a degree in business, he made a decision. He was going to find Rosario Cruz, no matter what it took, and he was going to make sure she knew that her years of sacrifice had not been in vain. Finding someone in the Philippines when you only know their name and the province they came from is nearly impossible, but David had resources that most people did not. He hired a private investigator in Manila who specialized in locating overseas Filipino workers. He provided every detail he could remember: Rosario's full name, her approximate age, the name of the recruitment agency that had hired her, the province of Batangas. The investigator worked for 3 months, checking records, interviewing people in Batangas, following countless dead ends. Finally, he found a Rosario Cruz who matched the description, working at a small daycare center in Manila. The investigator sent David a photograph, and even though 15 years had passed, even though Rosario's face was lined with age and weariness, David recognized her immediately. Those were the same gentle eyes that had looked at him with such love. That was the same warm smile that had comforted him through countless childhood hurts. He booked a flight to Manila the next day. When David walked into that daycare center on that August afternoon in 2018, Rosario was sitting on a small plastic chair, reading a story to a group of 4-year-olds. She looked up when she heard footsteps, and for a moment, she did not recognize the tall, handsome young man in the expensive suit standing in the doorway. But then he smiled, that same smile from when he was a little boy, and he said in slightly rusty Tagalog, "Hello, Mama Rosie. Do you remember me?" Rosario's hands flew to her mouth and she stood up so quickly that her chair toppled over. The children looked confused as this strange man and their teacher stared at each other across the room. Then Rosario whispered, "David," and she started to cry. David crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around the tiny woman who had been his entire world when he was a child. They stood there, holding each other and crying, while the children watched in fascinated silence and the other daycare workers peeked through the doorway, trying to understand what was happening. Later that evening, sitting in a quiet cafe in Manila, David and Rosario talked for hours. She told him about her years after leaving Saudi Arabia, about the loneliness and the struggle to rebuild her life. He told her about growing up, about going to university, about his complex relationship with his parents, and then he told her why he had come. He had started a foundation, he explained, with money from his trust fund and donations from other wealthy families in the Gulf region who had been moved by his story. The foundation was called Second Mothers, and its mission was to support Filipino nannies and domestic workers. It provided scholarships for their children, emergency financial assistance for families facing crises, and retirement support for women who had spent their lives caring for other people's children. He wanted Rosario to be the foundation's first beneficiary. He handed her an envelope containing a check for $50,000, enough to buy a comfortable house in her home province and ensure financial security for the rest of her life. He also offered her a position as a consultant for the foundation, helping to identify and support other Filipino caregivers in need. Rosario stared at the check, unable to believe what she was seeing. She had spent 15 years earning and saving every peso, sending most of it to her family, and now this child she had raised was giving her more money than she had earned in her entire career. But David was not finished. He told her that his father, Ahmed, who had matured considerably over the years and felt deep regret about how Rosario had been dismissed, had agreed to fund the foundation's operations for the next 10 years. He told her that they had already identified 50 Filipino nannies in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar who would receive support. He told her that his mother, Lila, had even contributed to the foundation, her way of acknowledging that her jealousy 15 years ago had been unfair and hurtful. And he told Rosario something that made her cry all over again. He told her that she was the reason he had become the person he was today, that her love and care had shaped his values and his character more than anything else in his life, and that he would always, always consider her his second mother. The story of David and Rosario's reunion was covered by news outlets across the Philippines and the Middle East. Videos of their emotional embrace in the daycare center went viral on social media, viewed millions of times by people who were moved by this testament to the power of love that transcends employer-employee relationships. Filipino communities around the world shared the story with pride, celebrating a rare instance where a caregiver's sacrifice was recognized and honored. The Second Mothers Foundation grew rapidly, with donations pouring in from individuals and corporations inspired by David's gratitude and Rosario's story. Within 2 years, the foundation was supporting over 500 Filipino domestic workers across the Middle East, providing educational scholarships to 200 children and operating 3 retirement homes in the Philippines, specifically for overseas Filipino workers returning home after decades abroad. But perhaps more importantly, David and Rosario's story sparked a broader conversation about the hidden costs of global domestic work. Journalists and researchers began documenting the experiences of the millions of Filipino women who left their families to care for other people's children, who sacrificed their own chances at motherhood to mother the children of the wealthy. Labor rights organizations used the story to advocate for better protections for domestic workers, including minimum wage standards, regulated working hours, and requirements that employers facilitate regular visits home. Several Middle Eastern countries, moved by the viral nature of David's gesture, implemented new policies improving conditions for domestic workers. And countless families who employed Filipino nannies began to view them not as servants, but as the remarkable, selfless women they truly were. Rosario retired from the daycare center and purchased a beautiful house in Batangas, not far from the fishing village where she had grown up. Her siblings and their families visit often, and she has become the beloved aunt to a dozen nieces and nephews. She works part-time as a consultant for the Second Mothers Foundation, traveling occasionally to speak at conferences and share her story. But her favorite days are the quiet ones, sitting on her porch overlooking the ocean, finally at peace after so many years of struggle and sacrifice. David visits her several times a year, bringing his wife and, more recently, his own infant daughter. When Rosario holds David's baby girl in her arms, she feels a sense of completion, a sense that the circle of love has somehow closed. She gave her youth to caring for David, and now, in a beautiful twist of fate, he has given her security, recognition, and the family connection she thought she had lost forever.
David is now 31 years old and runs his family's business alongside his father. But his real passion is the Second Mothers Foundation, which has become one of the most respected organizations supporting overseas Filipino workers in the Middle East. He speaks frequently at business conferences and philanthropic gatherings, sharing Rosario's story and encouraging other wealthy families to recognize and appreciate the caregivers who play such crucial roles in their lives. He has also become an advocate for policy reforms, working with government officials in both Saudi Arabia and the Philippines to improve the conditions and protections for domestic workers. His mother, Lila, who initially resented Rosario, has undergone her own transformation. She publicly apologized to Rosario during a foundation event, acknowledging that her insecurity had caused pain to both her son and the woman who had cared for him so devotedly. The two women have developed a respectful, if not warm, relationship, united by their shared love for David. The lesson of David and Rosario's story resonates far beyond their personal journey. It is a reminder that the people who care for our children, clean our homes, and make our comfortable lives possible are not just employees or servants. They are human beings with dreams, families, and sacrifices that we often fail to see or acknowledge. Filipino nannies like Rosario leave behind everything they know and love to provide opportunities for their own families while nurturing and loving the children of strangers. They give the best years of their lives, their youth and vitality, to care for others, often receiving little recognition or gratitude in return. David's decision to find Rosario and honor her sacrifice was extraordinary, but it should not be. Every caregiver who has devoted their life to others deserves recognition, respect, and support. Every child who was loved by a nanny should remember that love, and when they are able, find ways to give back to the person who gave them so much. Today, if you visit Rosario's house in Batangas, you will see photographs covering every wall. There are pictures of her siblings and their families, documenting the lives that were transformed by her sacrifice. There are pictures of the many children she cared for over the years, both in Saudi Arabia and in the Philippines. And prominently displayed in her living room are several photographs of David, from the chubby-cheeked toddler she first met in 1993 to the confident young man who found her again in 2018. Visitors often ask about the handsome young man in the expensive suit standing next to her in these recent photos, his arm around her shoulders, both of them beaming with joy. And Rosario always gives the same answer, delivered with a smile that lights up her entire face. "That is my David," she says. "That is my son, not by blood, but by love." And love, as it turns out, is the strongest bond of all. The story of David Alraman and Rosario Cruz is not just a tale of one nanny and one grateful child. It is a story about the millions of Filipino women and men who work overseas, sacrificing their own happiness so their families can have better lives. It is a story about the children they care for, who often form deeper bonds with their nannies than with their own parents. It is a story about the complicated dynamics of wealth, privilege, and service in our globalized world. It is a story about recognition, gratitude, and the power of love to transcend social boundaries.
And most importantly, it is a story about the fundamental truth that every person, regardless of their job or social status, deserves to be valued, respected, and remembered for the contributions they make to the world. David did not have to search for Rosario. He did not have to give her financial security or create a foundation in her honor. But he chose to do these things because he understood that her sacrifice had shaped his entire life, and that gratitude demanded more than just kind words. It demanded action, recognition, and a commitment to ensuring that other caregivers would not be forgotten the way so many have been throughout history. In honoring Rosario, David honored every Filipino nanny, every overseas worker, every person who has left home to serve others. And in doing so, he reminded us all of the incredible power of simply saying thank you and meaning it with your whole heart.